Okay, hello. Today we'll talk about two architects, one from a Mexican architect, Luis Barragan, and a North American architect, Edward Durell Stone. And we begin with Luis Barragan. Let's see, I hope I have some. Yeah. Luis Ramiro Barragan Morfin, born March 9th, and today is March 9th, and that's the reason we talk about him. So he was born exactly 120 years ago. No, sorry, I didn't calculate correctly. 121 years ago, was a Mexican architect and engineer. I would say a Mexican engineer and architect, although he became famous as an architect. His work has influenced contemporary architects visually and conceptually. Like I said, there are two contexts, two architectures, the physical and the metaphysical. Well, the conceptual kind of relates to the second part. Barragan's buildings are frequently visited by international students and professors of architecture. He studied as an engineer in his hometown while undertaking the entirety of additional course to obtain the title of architect, whatever that means. Barragan won the Pritzker Prize, the highest award in architecture, in 1980, and his personal home, the Luis Barragan House and Studio, was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Barragan was born in Guadalajara, educated as an engineer. He graduated from the Escuela Libre de Ingenieros in Guadalajara in 1923. After graduation, he traveled through Spain and France. While in France, he became aware of the writings of Ferdinand Bach, a German-French writer, designer, and artist who Barragan cited throughout his life. In 1931, he again traveled to France with a long stopover in New York. In this trip, he met Mexican mural painter Jose Clemente Orozco, architectural magazine editors, and Frederick Kissler, was Romanian, and we don't talk about him. Surprise, surprise. In France, he briefly met Le Corbusier and finally visited the gardens realized by Ferdinand Bach. He practiced architecture in Guadalajara from 1927 to 1936 and in Mexico City thereafter. But allow me, please, to talk again about Frederick Kissler. He himself didn't say that he was Romanian, but I have a monograph on him by the Whitney Museum of American Art, where it says Romanian architect. He was born in Cernăuți, which was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but I think he had Romanian citizenship, and he left Bucharest at 28 after he studied a few years in Vienna without getting a diploma, two schools in Vienna. Anyway, a very interesting force in design and architecture, Frederick Kissler. But back to Luis Barragan. But before this, let's see a little bit the pictures that and the wording that I show at the beginning of the presentation: mystery and serenity. Indeed, these two words, I think, express well the architecture of Luis Barragan. Here he was an aristocrat. He was a well-to-do, man. He was not a poor man. He built even for himself. He had a great interest in landscape architecture and the gardens that he conceived and gave birth to, so to speak, besides nature, because of course nature gives birth to plants and landscapes. But I'm talking about the gardening skills belong to Luis Barragan. He says architecture is an art when one consciously or unconsciously creates aesthetic emotion in the atmosphere and when this environment produces well-being. Well, Peter Eisenman would have been totally opposed to Luis Barragan, but his former friend, Kenneth Frampton, would have totally agreed. In fact, Kenneth Frampton told me that he admired exactly this positioning in architecture of Luis Barragan, as opposed to the provocations of someone like Peter Eisenman. Because Peter Eisenman, as you probably know, or you may know, he advocated an architecture of confrontation, an architecture which makes you rather uncomfortable than comfortable. Here he is, probably an introverted man who loved seclusion, and he afforded it. He also says, all architecture which does not express serenity fails in its spiritual mission. Thus, it has been a mistake to abandon the shelter of walls for the inclemency of large areas of glass. I'm glad that he also seemed to be an adversary of large areas of glass, as I am too, but he used in his own home, actually, a large surface of glass, and we are going to see it. But as an Italian critic, Luigi Prestinenza, told me once, then never listen to what architects say. They say one thing and they do another thing. I don't think this is always true, and Barragan did use masonry walls quite convincingly, and only rarely he used, very rarely actually, a large piece of glass. As for if architecture which does not express serenity fails in its spiritual mission, I don't know what to say. It's very possible that Luis Barragan was a man tormented with inner demons. That's why he appreciated so much serenity. Because we always appreciate or talk about what we don't have. Like a critic here in Romania told me, artists always talk about money and bankers always talk about art. Why? Because bankers don't have art and artists don't have money. So it's very possible Luis Barragan actually was a very anxious man if he stressed so much the importance of serenity. Always elegant. So we read this. Here he's again equally elegant, an aristocrat, a gentleman, an engineer. In his own house with a most unusable stair, talking about ornament. He's not the only one who used who built phantasmagoric stairs, but Alvarado also has an interesting case, and we are talking here about Orthodox modernists in a way, in good measure functionalists. Luis Barragan, happy birthday to you, sir, on your 121st birthday. Drawings by this engineer, very poetical, and with a little bit of childlikeness, I would say. They use strong colors and so-called unconventional colors like pink. I see here the word pink. But in the context, the cultural, aesthetical, visual, chromatic context of Mexico, quite acceptable. He was a dreamer and a doer, and that's what architects should be: dreamers and doers. If they are just dreamers, is not enough. If they are just doers, is not enough. They have to be both. Now you see this stair appears almost obsessively in his drawings, and it was built anyway. Las Arboledas, north of Mexico City, 1955-1961. This is a remarkably and beautifully abstract masterpiece of architecture. I mean, talking about metaphysics in architecture, here we have it. It's done through material means. But Look at this surface of water, you know, is beyond itself, so to speak. And then a door at the end. And just like at the end of the stairs he built, at the end there is a door. Now, where exactly that door, and if I'm not even sure it is a functional door, but even if it's not functional, you know, for the mind is enough. If I am to paraphrase Geme Cantacuzino, who said that the ruined columns of Persepolis are enough for spirit. So here we see a door at the end, but we don't understand. This is a piece of water that runs into that door. Is it a door for water? It can be. A very subtle architect, Luis Barragan. As I said, a dreamer who built. He loved horses. He probably owned horses. He built for horses. It's very possible Andrei Tarkovsky, the great Russian film director, would have loved this image. And of course, nature, if we look at the majestic trees, adds to everything. I mean, you know, if an important architect today like Winnie Moss affords himself to say, to talk about, you know, outsmarting nature, this only shows how low we are, really. How could you outsmart nature? And why should we outsmart nature? Frank Lloyd Wright said, when he was asked, do you believe in God? And Frank Lloyd Wright said, I do, but I spell it nature. So if nature is God and God is nature, then what Winnie Ma said, outsmarting nature, would mean outsmarting God. Not the most modest statement in the world, rather childish and irresponsible. Anyway, but you see here clearly the almost the surreal tension between the abstract work of man and the organic nature, the organic quality of nature. House of the architect. So now we look at his own house, the Barragan house in Mexico City, 1947, 1948. Not the smallest house. Here you see that stair which preoccupied him. And you see in plan at least that it, you know, it lands into a wall, but there is actually at the top, at the end, the door. But the stair is a stair which would make Ernest Neufert completely tremble. Why is this stair in the library? You could even say it's the metaphysics of the stair, because a library is the place of gaining knowledge. And the stair symbolizes growth, moving upwards, learning. So maybe it has also a symbolic meaning. And it's certainly not a stair that one would use easily. We are going to see pictures with it. Now, talking about large pieces of glass, well, here it is in the living room. This is all glass. He wrote against large surfaces of glass, but it's glass from floor to ceiling and from left to right. Anyway, it was his own house. He afforded to, he had a studio and then all kinds of little spaces. Again, he was a well-to-do man. He even has a garage. Unfortunately, in some houses today, the garage is twice the size of the house. In the case of his house, the garage, I'm not trying to excuse him, but the garage is much smaller than the house. What do we see here? We see all kinds of spaces, no? Wonder, they even has a breakfast room. I mean, if you look at this plan, you will say this is a house for a large family. I think he lived alone. I mean, yes, there is a secretary's office with a quite spacious vestibule there, an office, a little office, but I only saw pictures. I think he was a solitary man. He lived alone. What would he do in all this house? You know, look at dining room, breakfast room, living room. The kitchen is rather ample. Of course he can afford he afforded serenity. But I'm tempted to think he was actually an anxious man, probably very anxious. That's why he needed desperately a serene architecture. Luis Barragan, and a significant piece of land dedicated to a garden. Now you see, as architects, we make plans, we make drawings for the house, and then if we have time and money and interest, we might do a little bit of a landscape design around the house if if we still have some time and some resources and so on. What if we start a project with a garden and then they make the house to match the garden and not the other way around? Personally, I think in our time we need more gardens than buildings because we suffocated nature. That's the truth. We need gardens, we need parks, we need nature. Let's try a project, an architectural project starting with a garden. The University of Cincinnati, the School of Architecture, has even a department of horticulture. They prepare gardeners in the School of Architecture. I find this example admirable. And here there are pictures in his own house. A view from the outside. Maybe those three persons there, or four, one is at the door, are students in architecture or architects, because it is a very visited building. I don't know if those yellow benches were proposed by Luis Barragan, probably not. The house is very subdued, is very reticent in terms of architectural expression. He didn't want to, stand out, like a flag, like a banner. But behind this wall, as we saw, is a large house. Luis Barragan, the Barragan House, 1947-1948. And it is a house that has UNESCO protection, is because it is considered a masterpiece of modern architecture. Are we thinking to use the chromatics of Louis Barragan? I don't think we are. We are afraid of color, but he was not afraid of color. Maybe because he was an engineer and he appreciated emotions. And look at this stair. There is a door there, but I don't know. It's a stair on which you have to step very, very carefully, on your tiptoes, probably. But it is almost a monastic atmosphere, because we are going to see a chapel by him, which has the same feeling as this space, as this room. You see the large piece of glass? Well, that's quite a window, is it not? But it's just one room. We can forgive him for betraying his own advice. So this is the library. I like very much the modesty of the facade, the main facade of the building towards the street. But here the garage seems to be more ample than what we saw in the plan. Maybe it was amplified in time, But anyway, there is a garage indeed. It must be beautiful to have such a, surroundings. I see here some changes. Again, the plan, we saw it, but we didn't see the second floor, and here it is. So from the library, that stair goes to a mezzanine, maybe another office of some sort. And above the garage is the guest room and all kinds of stairs here. You know, it's rather labyrinthical here as well. You know, there are two private offices. As far as I know, these men lived alone and probably worked alone. Very strange, the plan of the house somehow. Or maybe there were plenty of people, but they never showed up in the pictures. This might be possible too. Also, lots of bathrooms. I mean, one, two, three, four, and there were here, I think, also on the first floor, one or two. So 5 or 6, bathrooms. Not as many as Bill Gates. Indeed, I once even lived in the same building, in the same apartment, actually, for a few months with the architect who worked on one of the villas built by Bill Gates and his wife, actually the building where he lived. And if I remember correctly, he had 27 bathrooms. Well, I hope I'm not exaggerating, but I think it was 27 bathrooms in the house of Bill Gates and his wife. Why would they need 27 bathrooms? And they are also advocates of saving water. You know, apparently not only architects do not stand by their words, but even mega men like Bill Gates, or should we say Billy Gates? No, we can't do that to a king of today's world. No. How could we call a king Billy? But I have to say, I saw once in London, I think, a poster advertising Bill Shakespeare. It should have been Will Shakespeare, but even Will is, is a little bit, or maybe I'm just a conformist. You know, I want the whole name. Yeah, the house of, now seen from this side, the garage is indeed like in the plan, much smaller. I don't know what the other picture was. Plus, now there is this beautiful tree that before I didn't see. Anyway, you see his house, besides the dimensions of the house, doesn't stand out, on the, considering the vicinities in Mexico City. This is that stair from the library that does lead to a door, but anyway, as you can see, it doesn't have a horizontal landing surface at the top. You just step outside of this space through the door without a landing. I forgot how it is called in English. Oh, that's Romania. I love this, fixed, static telephones. I wish we could use some such, and they will probably come back to fashion, to be, fashionable again. This is the only kind of telephone I would accept. Unfortunately, I'm forced to use a maddening mobile phone, which I never take with me, in my pocket. I don't want to become the slave of a mobile phone, as the whole population of the world is enslaved by the mobile phone. God made us with 2 arms and 2 hands, but we actually have only one, because in the other one we have Its Majesty, the mobile phone. Here is the glass, but also with the sign of the cross, if I am to call it so. I would say he had mystical tendencies, Luis Barragan. He loved vessels, ceramic vases, containers, vessels, and they are beautiful. And Le Corbusier also loved them. From what I read, Le Corbusier, when he travels through Southeast Europe, he used to ship back to Switzerland such, earthy objects that he bought in, in Serbia and, around here. He loved them very much, Le Corbusier, and I see Louis Barragan loves them too, and I would understand why, because they are beautiful and they are expressions of their cultural artifacts, but they are also, almost symbols of the plenitude of the earth. It's earthenware, they are earthy. They even represent a femininity, I would say. The Barragan house in Mexico City. These newer drawings leave me cold. So widely recognized for his emphasis on color, light, shadow, form, and texture, it can only be expected that the former residence of Pritzker Prize winner Luis Barragan encompasses all of his trademarks. On its street in Mexico City, the stark facade of the house humbly blends in with its neighbors, giving no hints to the personality of its interior. Well, it doesn't give any hints also to the vastness of its interior. By the way, it is written wrongly here. It should be ITS without this thing in between T and S. And this is a mistake that can be found so very often. And I have my own speculative interpretation why this is so. Because it's actually, if it is spelled like this or ITS, it's the difference between being, it is, because it's an abbreviation of it is, and having. So between having and being, because when you say its interior, refers to having. But when you say it is interior, this is about being. So I think it is a confusion in our world about being and having. Because how else to explain that even in the United States, even in Great Britain, this mistake is being so often done, like here. It's written wrongly. It's not to the personality of its as it is written interior. And I think it's because of this confusion that capitalism so intensely promotes, that we think that by having, we are actually being. But it is not so. In fact, Eminescu, the great Romanian poet, said, I came to realize that those who have everything have nothing, and those who have nothing have everything. So perhaps we should reflect about these two verbs, to have and to be. And then maybe we'll make less often this mistake about writing its. The most prominent aspects of the design of Casa Barragan are the use of flat planes and light, both natural and artificial. The skylights and windows allow for visual tracking of light throughout the day. The floods of natural light and views of nature are the key purposes of the windows. Opening up into the garden, the back of the house creates a visible and physical relationship between the lower level and the backyard. Barragan often called himself a landscape architect because he placed as much emphasis on the exterior and surroundings of a building as he did on the interior. And by the way of this, I have to say, I'm very disappointed with the last Pritzker Prize. I think Chippendale has some qualities as an architect, but I reflected on his Berlin Museum, and I think there he did something sacrilegious towards the water, towards the river, that is a canal, a river that is right adjacent to the building. He turns the back of his building, a blank, massive wall towards water. And I think this is unacceptable, because not to honor this primordial force of life, which is water, shows, in my opinion, an unacceptable level of insensitivity. But I will elaborate more about this with some other occasion. But obviously Pritzker, which also has a very corrupt member in that family who runs, who is the governor of the state of Illinois, is indifferent to such matters. You know, the an affectionate, even mystical love, you know, for water, which obviously Mr. Chipperfield doesn't have. And I may sound arrogant, and I probably am, but I have no respect for an architect who turns his back so disappointingly towards water. No respect. Sorry. Upon entering, the visitor walks down a dark hallway until they suddenly encounter a pink wall, the first engagement with the known style of Barragan. The only function of this main room is to use the telephone, but it is still characteristically lit and decorated with simply a chair and a table, neither of which have changed location in the last 50 years. The double height space of the main room is separated only by lower partition walls, which separate the space into different areas. On the roof, a window is accentuated by the use of wooden girders. And this is the living room. I like this object here, which allows for, you know, very comfortable, you know, looking at books or small artworks or whatever. The play of privacy and visibility are seen throughout the front and back halves of the house. Towards the front, high windows are used to let light in but maintain privacy, whereas large windows open up the back to the garden. Since the back of the house opens up to private space, as opposed to the public street at the front of the house, Barragan is able to manipulate the windows accordingly. Barragan had a fascination with animals, particularly horses. So many relics of popular culture and symbols are found throughout the house. Crosses can also be found in multiple rooms, which, coupled with the bold colors used by Barragan, create a mythical and spiritual architecture. Did I read correctly? A mythical and spiritual architecture? I never heard of something like this. Of course, I am sarcastic towards myself, but that's because we don't think of the mythical and spiritual side of architecture, which is maybe its very core. He found many of his furnishings at craft markets and antique shops, all true to the cultural identity of Mexico. This cultural flair is also apparent in the bold pink, yellow, and lilac colors chosen by the architect. The minimalist style gives reason to the significance of detail. Every aspect of the house has its, again, the same mistake, its purpose, and is obviously planned by the architect. The purest upstairs, not the purist, lead visitors through the other stories of the house towards private bedroom and studio spaces. The colors and simplistic designs are carried out throughout each level, even out onto the terraces and roof. Barragan discovers a poetry in architecture, straying from the standard and conventional line and creating a unique style that distinguishes who he is as a person and architect. He fuses his personal experiences, dreams, and memories into a physical experience that is shared throughout cultures and ages. We know that he received the Pritzker Prize in 1980, and his own house in 1988, when he died, became a museum. Now, some gardens. I don't know if he did the buildings too. It's possible that he didn't. I don't know. But he owned himself large estates. And I like the landscape very much. It shows clearly a lot of love for nature. And it's not, I think, unimportant that he considered himself a landscape architect. And not too many engineers would preoccupy themselves with what we look at here now, unfortunately. Frank Lloyd Wright said, study nature. It will never abandon you. It will never let you down. Study nature, love nature, indeed. But do we do that? I'm not so sure. I'm impressed by the landscape, not by the building. Well, I don't know if he designed those buildings or not. Why is it that nature didn't work with the T-square and the rectangle? But the scientists call what nature does, or the method of nature, spontaneous order. But we humans have a difficult time to work in the same way. A chapel, a beautiful chapel from 1954, 1960, Tlalpan Chapel. Uh, Sorry about the resolution of this plan. I hope I have a better one. Well, here it's not complete, but we see it. We see it somehow better. Here it is a cross, very simple, but full of dignity, and then a mysterious light coming from the side. It's also interesting that it's asymmetrical. It's on the side, the stair. It's a deeply felt and deeply thought architecture, the architecture of Luis Barragan. And you can see clearly his love for gardens, for landscape, for what is outside of the building, but also for what is inside. He was probably a deeply religious man, but not in a conventional way. I mean, look, the light itself, the quality of light is mystical. And as you can see, the sensuality of color doesn't contradict spirituality. I mean, can you imagine a pink cross? Well, here it is. But under different conditions of light, it changes color too. Here we see it, it's pink. So that cross is here in plan, and the light comes from here. I go a little bit quickly because we also have to talk about Edward Durell Stone. Chapel, Luis Barragan. It's quite tall, the space, as you can see the human silhouette there. Another house, 1955. Again, the vessels, the ceramic vessels. Again, the cross and the glass. Sorry about the resolution of this picture. Here we see a purity of design that we could describe as being Scandinavian, but we are in Mexico. Pink again. The model. It is an architecture of serenity, but as I said, it's possible that behind the serenity of his architecture, there was a man with some anxieties. This was not built for him, but it's very possible he chose even what was displayed on those shelves. Other gardens, Guadalajara, no pictures. Now, this is an interesting work done in collaboration, not just with Matthias Goeritz, but two other people. The entrance of Mexico City, 1957, 1958, a monumental sculptural work. Here it is. Here is still in gray, but I think originally they were brightly colored, and we are going to see pictures with them colored as well. It seems Mexico City, aesthetically speaking, at least in this sense, considering this work, is more sophisticated than more other cities. Employing, these were the people, actually, three people: Luis Barragan, Matthias Goeritz, an artist, and Jesus Rice. I don't know exactly what he was. Anyway, they did a brilliant work together. And here I shouldn't insist on it. I just show it quickly. It's a project done by Espacio Cero, mausoleum for Barragan, Goeritz, and Rice. The interior, a project, a speculative project to bring the remains of Barragan, Goeritz, and Rice inside the structures that they themselves built. Anyway, this group Espacio Cero call themselves, I don't know if they are called emotional art. No, they are called Espacio Cero, but they promote an emotional architecture. Well, it should be, all architecture should be emotional, even if it's a subdued emotion, but emotions should be present. Apparently, Goeritz published the Emotional Architecture Manifesto, in which they argued that architecture needs to be spiritually uplifting, something we very often forget. So Luis Barragan, the Mexican architect Luis Barragan, and the sculptor and painter Matthias Goeritz, who were frustrated by the cold functionalism of modernism. They were not the only one. I am also very frustrated by the cold functionalism of modernism. And this is the project. Again, this is not the work of Luis Barragan or Matthias Goeritz, but it's an interesting work. Anyway, I'm not going to read because we have a lot to see. I just want to show that some younger architects thought of creating a mausoleum for these for this team of three, creators that made that mausoleum. And these are images during the construction. They are massive, they are tall, they are, monumental indeed. And within the project, the mausoleum, that's where these young architects proposed to be the remains of, Luis Barragan on the left, and then Matthias Goeritz, and then the third one there. And this is how they are actually, these five towers, abstract as they are, and at night and at day. I don't know what they symbolize. They probably symbolize something, but I don't know sufficient. I don't have sufficient information about them, but I'm sure you can find it on the web. But when you look with the misery of publicity all around, we see the Corona beer on the left and on the right Chevrolet and so on, and the traffic. And then these 5 columns erupting for spiritual significance, for different interests, after all, psychological, mental, spiritual, for culture, essentially. While all around we have commerce and running on the highways of the world. And here is the plan. Not too bad. I can read what's going on there. So this introverted man, because I think he also assumed the public function of architecture, and he did it, I would say, in an impressive way. Mexico City. They uplift the spirit. They don't have interior space. They are just prisms, triangular prisms that celebrate some some purpose, some meaning that I do not know of, but I judge them aesthetically, and they are impressive. And I don't think it's just form. I mean, I wouldn't consider them formalist gestures. Maybe they whisper something about eternity, as opposed to the madness of traffic and commerce, which has no interest at all in the metaphysics of the beyond. Now, what is this? Another house? No, this is this is in a way the house of horses. It was built for horses, and clearly Luis Barragan had the greatest affection for horses. And here we see this is a symphonic work done mainly for animals. But do we know what animals are? We think everything is made for man, but do we actually know what a horse is? I like to fantasize that the work it pleases the horses very much. This is poetic architecture, in as much as the movies of Andrei Tarkovsky are poetic films. I wonder what the horses feel and think, surrounded by the words of Luis Barragan. We are probably tempted to think that they don't think and that they don't feel, but I'm not so sure. Beautiful architecture, beautiful horses. Well, this sculptural work, I don't think belongs to Luis Barragan. Nor this one. But it's interesting that there are these artistic interventions, these installations, this land art. It's possible that the work itself is conducive to such artistic gestures. It invites implicitly, without words, to continue to create. And this is a place for horses, essentially. And here is the penseur, the thinker, the architect, meditating, feeling, thinking. Another house, 1975, 1977. This one also has a very interesting part, which is this one, which would make the Orthodox functionalists tremble. It's pure mysticism here. Why would he create this space here? You know, with water inside it's like a pool of water inside the room, but it's not. I don't think it's meant to swim. I imagine the height of the water is not sufficient. It's a pool for thinking, not for swimming. This is like in the chapel that we saw. He practically brought the chapel and the spirituality of the chapel inside the house. And then he plays chromatically with opposite colors, in this case, almost opposite, blue and yellow. Well, it says here number 11, Piscina, but I never saw a picture with someone there in the water. I think it's for contemplation, not for actually swimming. But maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. I never saw a picture with someone, you know, enjoying swimming in that, and it's possible the depth of the water is not sufficient for that sort of thing. And always the courtyard, you know, the courtyard, the exterior comes into the interior. And the courtyard is highly important for the physiognomy of the house. And so are the trees, magnificent as they are. Sorry about the resolution of this. There is probably more to discover studying the plans of the house and the sections, because these are architectural works born from a deep meditation on architecture. 1976. Large houses, yes. I mean, look at that bedroom, you know, number 6. It's it has 40 square meters or so. Well, here is the swimming pool. Well, it has, I don't know, 40 centimeters at the most in height for the depth of water. This is not a swimming pool. It's for the mind, it's for the eye, it's for the spirit, it's not for the body. It's magnificent. Frank Lloyd Wright was correct. A great architect is a great poet. And that's what Luis Barragan was. He was a great poet. This is a club, I think this one, 1973. I'm not sure if he was the only. I don't think he was actually the author of this. I found his name associated with this building, but it's not. I'm actually doubtful that he was truly and fully the author of this building. I don't like this building. It's not, to me, it doesn't seem like a Luis Barragan, or is a Luis Barragan part of a team, or no, this is not Luis Barragan, but this is Luis Barragan. You know, a lonely man, an aristocrat, a poet, a man who tried to bring spirituality to architecture, despite the rather different statement of his shirt, but it was probably very hot on that day. A very interesting man, a very interesting engineer, and a very interesting architect. And now we go to the second and last, or the third and last presentation today. Um, Edward Durell Stone, an architect not quite known where we are, but let's talk a little bit about him, because he's in a different way interesting too. Edward Durell Stone, 1902, 1978, a little younger than Louis Barragan. So Edward Durell Stone, himself born on March 9th, happy birthday, Edward Durell Stone, was an American architect known for the formal, highly decorative buildings he designed in the 1950s and 1960s. His works include the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the United States Embassy in New Delhi, India, the Keller Center. By the way, that embassy was highly valued by Frank Lloyd Wright, and he didn't value a lot of things, Frank Lloyd Wright, besides his own works. The Keller Center at the University of Chicago, and the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts in Washington, D.C. This was the man, an interesting picture. And I think he was an interesting man, actually. Modernist, populist architect. Usually I don't like anything populist, but I think he had a complex nature. Edward Durell Stone, the so-called formalist, they say people are fundamentally interested in only three things: food, sex, and shelter. I can say I'm authoritative on the first two, although I'm in favor of both. It's shelter that concerns me, and it's nice to be doing something people are interested in. But on another occasion, he actually placed a question mark, in relation with what we call architecture. Maybe I have that that quotation too about him, or some wording. Anyway, here he is right near Frank Lloyd Wright, who is on the third from the left, and I think the lady was the wife of Edward Durell Stone. Here he is looking at some tall models of his buildings. Edward Durell Stone, 15 iconic projects from rethinking the future. which is a website, and you can have access to it on the web. Radio City Music Hall, Manhattan, not bad. These buildings' interiors claim to be the most beautiful in that period that didn't require performance to sell tickets and generate revenue. Edward Darrell Stone, in collaboration with Donald Esky, designed and executed this music hall and bewildered its visitors with its elegant Art Deco interiors. His design kept traditions alive with modern requirements. For over 8 years, it has been listed as the world's largest indoor theater. It officially opened for visitors in 1932. Due to the stock crash of 1929, Rockefeller was in a dilemma whether to continue to the lease, which was costing him $3.3 million a year, or to break it. But he decided to build a complex that would attract people and generate revenue despite the dreaded economic climate. And Edward left no table unturned to bring that vision into reality. Here it is, Radio City Hall in Manhattan. It still exists. And the interior is not bad either. Of course, it's the flamboyance of Manhattan, it's the flamboyance of the, doing commerce even with art. But it is a good work that functions and it attracts people, and thus it was not needed to be demolished or changed dramatically. Columbus Circle, Manhattan, formerly called Gallery of Modern Art, 2 Columbus Circle is built on a small irregular site with its share of controversies and different public opinions. Then New York Times architecture critic Ada Louise Huxtable stated this 10-story concrete building as the die-cut Venetian palazzo on lily pops. The north facade complements the Columbus Circle with a concave surface following the curve. The white Vermont Imperial Square marble was perforated above the loggia and at the edges of each facade to create bronze circular windows. This project turned out to be the milestone in his career. His approach to building a structure in modern style with a touch of ornamentation was not accepted by critics. At first, his design got appreciated by millions. And here it is. Now it is modified by Allied Works, but for many years, the building was like this. And I actually appreciate the fact that Edward Darrell Stone stood against the trend and assumed even ornament in his architecture. For a long period of time, I didn't value his architecture, but I'm beginning to see that he was standing up for something that maybe should be remembered. So this is in a very central location in Manhattan, and the building is seen from, Central Park. You see the trees of Central Park. I passed by this building many times. I was never really impressed by it, but now from a distance, from across the ocean and over the years, I somehow begin to appreciate it, but unfortunately it doesn't look like this any longer because it was modified. John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts, Washington, D.C. The marble facade with ornamentation was built in 1971 after the assassination of then President John F. Kennedy. It was renamed as Living Memorial. The National Cultural Center Act 1958 was taken into consideration while designing. Stone designed a total of 6 stages and the complex keeping his design principle intact. The grand foyer with a riverfront connects to the 3 main theaters. With the embossed ceiling and crystal chandeliers, the large concert hall provides outstanding acoustics, which enhance or maybe the user experience to the other level. I don't know. I mean, it's not a building I'm instantly attracted towards, but apparently it works with its rather officious modernism, which again, I don't appreciate very much. Anyway, the Center for Performing Arts, JF Kennedy. The Richard H. Mandel House, New York, built in 1935, so it was, 88 years ago. This historic home overlooking reservoir is designed in international style using concrete blocks and steel frames with stucco finish. It is a Z. My God, we know what Z stands for in Putin's army. It is a Z-shaped building location on the sloping site with a partial basement recycling. Anyway, I'm not going to read all of this. Unlike Stone's other designs, this one lacks additional ornamentation. It has uniform walls, asymmetrical layout, focused more on keeping the floor horizontal with protruding balconies and ribbon windows. Modernistic design, almost international style, asymmetrical, no ornaments, surrounded by a beautiful landscape and trees. That is nature. Museum of Modern Art, New York. Now we are talking about a very important building in New York City. Near it now, Jean Nouvel built an interesting skyscraper. So in 1939, so it was built before the Second World War, Edward Durell Stone and Goodwin collaborated to build this stunning museum. Stone was known for his modern international designs and the fusion of balanced ornamentation with modern buildings, while Goodwin was known for his traditional Beaux-Arts style designs. He was also a member of the Museum of Modern Art's Board of Trustees. They designed a 6-story structure that can meet the expectation of the modern museum everyone had imagined. The major materials used to construct this grand structure are marble for the facade, glass walls, horizontal windows on office floors and galleries with 2 levels and translucent glazing. The combination of glass and marble created a remarkable landmark in the neighborhood. Here it is, thoroughly modern. I don't see much of the Beaux-Arts tradition here. It is indeed MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art, New York City. I once had myself an exhibition here outside of the museum on the last day of the retrospective of Louis Kahn, when I paid myself my respects to Louis Kahn with a series of works that were paying homage to Louis Kahn. And because I couldn't go inside the building, I displayed them outside on the last day of the retrospective of Louis Kahn. Right in front of this museum, the Museum of Modern Art. Of course, I needed the approval of the New York police. Goodyear Household, Westbury, what is this? I'm not going to read. Again, healthy modernism, a modernism that looks almost fresh today and idealistic somehow, although it was probably not very special at the time. There is a side of Edward Durell Stone which turns me off a little bit, but I still think he was a complex man, an interesting man somehow. Maybe rather unhappy with doing architecture, although he claimed that he was highly, interested in shelters, in the shelter. And we are going to see his own house at the end. Stanford University Medical School, Stanford, California. Here it is. Here he probably exasperated again with his decorative interventions. And I would understand in a way the exasperation of the critics, who expected modern architecture to be completely devoid of ornamentation. It's true, his ornamentation is far from being as creative as the ornaments of Louis Sullivan. Yes, it's true. But what is surprising is that the embassy Edward Durell Stone built in New Delhi attracted the attention and the applauses of none other than Frank Lloyd Wright. Very unexpected. Walter and Betsy Johnson home, Connecticut. Anyway, this is also an interesting building somehow. You know, it's a building which is sophisticated in terms of the history of architecture. It's symmetrical, but it also has somehow a level of rurality because of the material used. It's primal. It's a Ur architecture, almost Japanese somehow in its spirit. Interesting that agglomeration of things, table and chairs and piano, grand piano, right near the entrance or exit door. I wonder if that door is used. Probably not. Otherwise, I wouldn't explain that density of entities right there near the door. United States Embassy, New Delhi, established in 1950. The U.S. Embassy complex comprises the Roosevelt House, Chancery, office space, and so on. Its diverse studies in climate change and the tropical climate have helped me deliver climate responsive structure. The embassy was formally inaugurated on 1959, the 5th of January. The jail facade keeps the traditional Indian architecture alive, while the grand entry and double height glass facade brings in a modern touch. This fusion often leaves every visitor mesmerized by the beauty and revives the cultural niches or riches within them. This is the building, which again, I was very surprised to read that Frank Lloyd Wright admired this building a lot. And we saw the picture of Frank Lloyd Wright and Edward Durell Stone at that restaurant. Because this is not by in any way, you know, an organic architecture in the sense Frank Lloyd Wright understood it. It's a, you know, a governmental building, an official building, almost officious, and uses ornament and ornamentation, yes, in a discreet but obvious way. I'm rather surprised that Wright loved this building, because the ornament is not very creative actually, but maybe in the context of India was the right thing to do at that time. The columns are interesting here. I wish I had more pictures with it. Sorry, I don't. A hotel in Panama. I'm not going to read. Commercial structure, Panama Hotel. Hotels in general are commercial structures. After Luis Barragan, it's a little bit difficult to look at commercial structures. A college, Claremont, California, built in 1955. Built of, I don't know what these are, knobby concrete square blocks called warts for students to hook their skateboards. Interesting. Introduced knobby concrete square blocks called warts for students to hook their skateboards. The stone used his signature style, ornamented this modern structure with Beaux-Arts. Critics showed their displeasure towards the design, calling it the ugliest building, while Stone exclaimed it as the modernist masterpiece. So there, Stone on one side, the critics on the other. This is the building. Lots of landscape here, not like Barragan's landscape. Bank Art Center in New Jersey, formerly known as Garden State Art Center. This building was constructed and officially inaugurated in 1968. A capacity for 17,500 in the amphitheater and 7,000 in open space. It has ranked as one of the most successful amphitheaters in the country. It is known for its extraordinary saucer-shaped roof supported by 8 large pillars made of concrete and open sides of the amphitheater. In 1996, it was renamed as PNC Bank Art Center after its naming rights were sold to Pittsburgh-based banking company. Of course, the banks are buying everything. This is the building. I'm not even sure I understand what I'm looking at here. It's huge. It doesn't look so huge from here, but you see the open air amphitheater. Edward Durell Stone. It's probably pleasant to sit there on a chair and watch something, a concert. PepsiCo Inc. Harrison, New York. I was there. I didn't know it was designed by Edward Durell Stone for Pepsi, of course. In 1956, spent almost $2 million for the construction of the earliest headquarters designed by Edward Durell Stone. It contains 7 building blocks connected through corners with a huge sculpture garden open to the public. This garden consists of 45 sculptures in a contemporary style. Of course, the great collection, because as I said, bankers and, Pepsi corporate headquarters and people, they all love art. All the buildings are joined through a corner. In 1966, they moved to Westchester, and later the building was named the Olivetti Building. The design for this building, and I don't understand very well. They were moved to Westchester, but I saw them. Maybe I saw them in Westchester. I don't know. The design for this building was done to represent inverted ziggurat. The buildings have exterior facade clad with precast concrete panels with dark strip windows, creating a striking contrast. Later, it was classified as one of the most beautiful buildings in the city. That is in Westchester, I imagine. And here it is. This work by Edward Durell Stone. They are not so impressive from the level of the eye. They look better from the air, but yes, they have great artworks all around and the landscape is good. North Carolina State, we are approaching the end of this presentation, rather long. North Carolina State Legislative Building, completed in 1963, and a governmental building again. I don't know. These governmental buildings leave me a little bit cold, but they have their role, I guess, in life, as other things perhaps do. Interesting that he placed these pavilions on top, almost to sabotage the urbanity of the building. What I look at here, it makes me think of some proposals by various architects today, and even buildings like mad buildings proposing, a village on top of another building, or Fujimoto. Edward Durell Stone did this, half a century ago, if not more, with his, sloping roofs on top of a building with a flat terrace. Interesting in a way that this was done then at that time. He could have done the second floor also, with a flat roof, terrace jardin or not. And the State University of New York at Albany designed in his signature style stonework on the campus, emphasizing more on the residential quadrants with all the required facilities planned around it. I'm a little bit confused by the wording that sometimes you find on Wikipedia. Constructed in 1964, the campus has a combination of design elements that attract its visitors, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, this is the complex. It's more than a building, it's a vast. So what is its function? The State University of New York at Albany. Albany is actually the capital of the state of New York. It's not New York, it's Albany. Quite large, and Wallace Harrison has great buildings here. The administrative buildings, the power center of the state of New York, which is in Albany, but I don't have pictures here of. I just show what Edward Durell Stone did. It's a decent architecture, but maybe not more than that. I thought I had also images of his house, but it seems I don't. Ah, no, I do have other images, but I don't understand what's going on here. Something happened to my, I think this is a house designed by Edward Durell Stone that arrived at this stage, if you can believe it. Yes, it happens. This is an image from the Embassy of India in New Delhi, the Embassy of the United States in India, in New Delhi. And I like this picture more than the colored ones. And I'm now, I end here you might see echoes of the, Eur complex of buildings in Rome from a different political, upbringing, so to speak. And now his own house, and with this I end this presentation on Edward Durell Stone, his own house in Manhattan. And I thought, it's actually, I forgot about this, but I thought that you can actually make a house today where the facade is just an emblem, cryptical, decorative, and behind it hides the actual house. And look at the building on the left and look at the building on the right, and then you have this rather mysterious house, which doesn't tell you what's happening behind the decorative screen, the mask, the veil. Well, behind it, there isn't much glory, if you ask me. I mean, it's a comfortable, cushioned interior of a well-to-do family, but the taste of the designers to me is a little bit, eclectic, so to speak. There is opulence, there is a certain level of, collecting mentality here. You look at that chandelier and you ask, what does this have to do with modernism? No, with modernity, and nothing. But then, who knows? Maybe a chandelier could, by contrast, emphasize the stark modernity of modernism. And look at the stair, with covered in, velvet or, that ornamented, carpet, an opulent long table. Of course, he was well-to-do, and I'm sure he had maids and so on who would take care of that table in the absence of a maid, at least one. And then you look at that modernistic large painting on the wall, and you wonder, what does the chandelier have to do with the painting? Maybe he was a little bit confused. Opulence could lead to confusion. That was it. Let's wish him happy birthday. And thank you for being here today.